I love coming and talking to young people. So they said that all of you guys are Republicans?
Yes.
That's so cool. And y'all are so open about it. At Penn State, that is pretty amazing. Someone else also said this is the largest group on campus, or the largest, what, political group on campus? I love it. That is so cool. Most of you are considered Gen Z, right?
Yes.
I love Gen Zs. I mean, no, honestly, I have a kid I have two who are 15, just turned 16 last week, and one is 13, so they also fall in Gen Zs. And it is something about the Gen Z group. You're not necessarily conservative, but you're not necessarily progressives. You're very, I don't know, alert. Something very unique in that you have this ability to cut right through the malarkey like no one else. And I can appreciate that. I've been looking at a lot of polls for your group because my children are you. And so I'm very interested in how you guys tick. There's like a light in my face. Yeah, thank you so much. I kept trying to shift and move and dodge. So now I'm a little blind. Give me a minute. So I really want this to be about you, because I'm sure you have a lot of questions. And so I'm gonna be very mild in what I say, and I'm going to allow you to direct the flow of the conversation. How about that? Right? It's a little bit different than most politicians. Fortunately, I'm not a politician. I am running to be an elected official. There's a huge difference in my mind for that, between the two. So if you want, how many of you already know my story, who I am? So not that many, so I'm going to share a little bit. If you wanna ask more, then I will have that conversation as well. But my name is Kathy Barnette. I am running for US Senate. I've been running now for 11 months. Every month feels like a year, so technically 11 years. It's been really crazy. Today, we turned in over 10,000 petition signatures. I have a gentleman here. What's your name? I just see Doug Mastriano hat on you.
My name is Jody Reese. I'm his coordinator.
Jody Reese, like the candy bar.
Yeah.
People like Jody help get, are y'all familiar with the petition signatures? So you can run for 11 months, but you get 2 weeks to get your name on that ballot, right? And if you're not able to get your name on the ballot, then everything you've done is for nothing. You just gotta go home. And you only need 2,000, but within the first 2 days, my campaign collected over 3,000 signatures. That's unheard of. And so I submitted what I needed plus some well in advance. And then today we went and submitted, so altogether over 10,000 signatures. That's a record. I'm so sure I'm gonna find that out, but that's a record. No one does that, right? And it's really because of people like Jody and so many others. One lady, Elena, in Franklin County stood outside of a trash dump. Most of us, if we want our trash to be picked up, we just roll it to the end of our street. But because there are so, outside of Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, there's a lot of just rural land out here. And so they do not have trash pickup. They have to physically go and dump it themselves. And she stood outside on a very cold Wednesday and collected over 300 signatures for me. That is unheard of. And I'm so very grateful for people like you. But that is really huge. I think it speaks to my grassroots infrastructure, which is very different from the people I'm running against, who happen to be extremely wealthy people, who don't even live in the state prior to running for this election. But they're very wealthy, and as a result, these particular ones feel very entitled, that this is their turn it's just their turn. And so they're spending a tremendous amount of money on television ads, but very little infrastructure. And so just been very, very interesting. I saw Jody, I just wanted to give him a shout out for that. But for me, I grew up on a little pig farm in southern Alabama. I grew up below the bottom rung of the economic ladder. I grew up in a home with no insulation, no running water, an outhouse in the back and a well on the side. And I know you're like, really? Yes, really. I'm not that old. But that's how I grew up. That house that that I just described, my great-great-great-grandmother Rhoda grew up in that home. She was a slave, have the blood of slaves coursing through my veins. And I often think about the environment in which I grew up in and the environment in which my young children are growing up in. I'm a black woman married to a black man raising black babies, and so I think often about what my babies are being taught and versus what I was being taught, right? And although I grew up in a very dire situation, when you're a child and you're loved, you don't know how dire your situation is, and I was loved. So I had no idea until I grew up. When my grandmother would ask me to help her in the garden, I thought she wanted to spend quality time with me. It wasn't until I grew up that I realized that in large part, that was for our survival. There was no Giant or Super Walmart. If we wanted beans or greens or potatoes, we had to go and grow it ourselves. And so, although my family had a number of things they could have complained about, that they wanted to decry victimhood, they certainly could have done it. They had tremendous amount of reasons on how they were being victimized. But I don't remember one time anyone ever looking at me and calling me a victim. Out of all of that, and there's a lot of other things, but no one ever looked at me and said, Kathy, because you're black, because you're a woman, because you're poor, all the odds are against you. You might as well not try, right? No one ever said that to me. And because no one ever told me that, and because I did not grow up with a psychology of black, I became the first in my family to go and finish college. I spent 10 years in the military, where I was accepted into officer candidacy school. I spent time in the financial industry, working with A.G. Edwards & Sons and Bank of America Capital Asset Management. In the comptroller's department at J.C. an adjunct professor of corporate finance. Do we have any finance or economic majors? I love it. I love it. And so that's what I did. I authored my first book that came out at the beginning of the pandemic. Fortunately, COVID doesn't mess with you if you're a big box retailer, only if you're a mom and pop. So therefore, I went #1 on Amazon when everything else got shut down. So my book went #1 there. A lot of things, a lot of different journeys. Homeschooled my kids for the first 6 years of their schooling. A lot of different journeys. Fox News, and the writer for Fox News, and now I'm running for U.S. Senate. And like I tell people, only in America do you hear that kind of arc in the story. Right? I clawed my way from underneath a rock and was able, by the grace of God, along with my husband, to create a different story for myself. And so for me, one of the many reasons why I'm in this race is because I recognize that America that allowed me, little black girl on a pig farm, to claw her way from underneath that rock and create a new story for myself, that America is about to come to a close. And I think about my children who are Gen Zs, right? And I think about what kind of America are they about to inherit? And it's very unnerving for me. In fact, what really got me into getting into politics, because this was not on my bucket list. I was living my best life before I decided to do this. Wrote my book, I'm thinking about all the money I'm gonna get and what we're gonna do with that. And then although I was never interested in politics, I wrote my entire book before I knew I was gonna run for office. Had I known I was gonna run for office, I probably wouldn't have put half the stuff in there, but. And so, but I download policies, like date night, literally, having date night, and I'm reading to my husband about policies. And at that particular time, I had just downloaded Democrats, their idea of immigration reform. Is called the New Way Forward. So this was in late 2019. My daughter, she was practicing her geography, and I was sitting next to her reading through what I had downloaded the night before. And everything I read in late 2019, it is what we're watching right now take place on the border, at our southern border. And it's going to get worse. It's not even halfway through what they talked about. There's a section in that New Way Forward called the right to return home, meaning everyone we've ever deported for whatever the reason will have the right to return to America. And you and I, your parents and I, we will have the privilege of paying for that, right? And so I'm sitting there reading that, and I became so alarmed. I'm like, what in the world are my babies going to inherit? will there even be in America? And that truly was what got me to start thinking, what else can I do, right? I did the military. I have, I don't know, several hundred videos out there with me debating liberals. I love it. A good stress reliever. And just debating and talking through issues, right? Trying to be very sober and thoughtful and deliberate about how we begin to address various issues. So I was doing all those things, wrote a book about my journey off the Democrat plantation and into a different way of thinking, but now I'm sitting there thinking, what more can I do? And, you know, famous last words. And less than 2 weeks later, someone walked into my sphere, I had never met him, and said, have you ever thought about running for politics? I was like, no. And then next thing I know, here I am, right? And God has been extremely faithful, but even in this particular race, just some of the best people all across the state. I mean, that is, you know, I should not be here because I don't have the millions that my counterparts are just spending out of their pocket. And yet, you know, the polls are coming out. I'm now the Fox News poll in the top 3. Haven't spent any money on television ads. My first ad starts tomorrow, so look that up. Share it with everyone. Help me make it go viral. I know y'all all have phones. Just what you do at your age. Are you on Twitter, or is that old? Too old for you. I know Facebook, y'all are off of that. But Twitter, Kathy for True. You would be amazed what you liking my page does towards algorithms. They are suppressing us like crazy. I mean, it's just crazy. And even though they're suppressing me like crazy, especially on Facebook and Twitter, we get over 1 million impressions a month just on Facebook alone, right? I know y'all aren't on there, it's like old people, but he's like, yes, it is old people. I know. But yet, 1 million, right? And suppressing and don't have the big money that the other people are having, but it's because people are actively seeking out something different. I think that's been the key. I am not a politician. I don't come across as a politician. There is something authentic and believable because I am authentic and believable, and because I'm truly unnerved about where our country is heading. I mean, I'm kind of hesitant to say how unnerved because y'all are just so young and wide-eyed and bushy-tailed. And I want you to keep that enthusiasm. But this thing is very unnerving. If you're paying attention, you should be very unnerved about where our country is about to head. If anyone wants to talk about Ukraine, I'm very open to that, because especially as you're listening to our leaders, even those on our side, right? Trying to find a nice way instead of saying petulant children, but even on our side, very reckless in their rhetoric right now, right? That's your future, right? That they're about to, they are ginning up. They ginned up a war that didn't need to happen, right? They just made that out of, I guess, you know, I mean, it's been crisis after crisis after crisis. COVID was waning, people were exhausted, and so then they had to create a new crisis, right? And so here we are in this new crisis that did not have to happen, and yet here we are. And now they are ginning up something even more diabolical. Pay attention to the 24-hour, 7 days a week, breathless coverage of what's going on in Ukraine right now. Very unnerving. So, I'm gonna pause and open up to questions. Let you guide me. Yes, sir.
What are some of the important issues you've heard come up from Pennsylvanians on the campaign trail so far?
Yeah, you know, trying to pick one issue is like trying to drink from a fire hydrant these days. It's like impossible. Everything is on fire, right? And it really just depends. It's like, you know, we're traveling over 1,000 miles a week. This week, I think we're gonna hit about 1,500.
At least.
Yeah, miles a week. So we're spending a lot of time getting to know Pennsylvanians and all across the Commonwealth. A very diverse state, a wonderful state, really great people. I mean, I'm just loving it. But people are under a tremendous amount of pressure, a tremendous amount of stress, right? So today it is gas prices. How many of y'all are feeling that? right? And let me tell you, there's no ceiling. My economic majors, my finance majors, there's no ceiling to that. It's gonna continue to go up, right? Inflation is another thing they talk about. How many of y'all are feeling that? Where's my phone? I met with, very powerful group of people today, and one of them happened to be agriculture. How many of you know agriculture is the largest industry here in Pennsylvania? Why?
I'm an ag major.
Yes. Now, I live in Montgomery County, which is right outside of Philadelphia. If you didn't know any better and you just lived in Montgomery County and Philadelphia and didn't travel outside of that, you would think lawyers and doctors were the #1 industry. But it's not, it's agriculture, right? And so today, so you would know this very well, but I took a photo of my notes because I knew I was coming here. Do you know how we make fertilizer? Nitrogen, right? And a big part of nitrogen is methane gas, right? But he was saying to me today, he has 600 acres of just corn, right? And in order to fertilize that, his cost of just the fertilizer last year was $40,000. This year, it's $120,000. And that's just fertilizer, just for his corn. Now, he has a lot of other crops, right? He said in December 2020, 9 trailer loads of nitrogen cost him $190 a ton. That's how he buys it. He has a lot of land. At the end of December 2021, 3 trailer loads cost him $560 a ton. It went from $190 to $560. 3 weeks ago, right before the Ukraine war, he got a bid, or he got the price of $615 a ton. So just in 3 years, it went from $190 to $560 to $615. Do you know what nitrogen or fertilizer is in? That's not a trick question. You like your eggs? How many of y'all eat eggs? How many of you eat meat? What about beans? What about whatever? If it's growing out of the ground, fertilizer is in that. Nitrogen is in that. And one of the things I did last year at the very beginning of my campaign, remember when they were saying the empty shelves at the grocery stores was really a sign of how great we were doing as a nation? I'm telling you, people really think we're stupid. But they said that. Now, growing up on a farm, I knew that didn't make any sense. So the first 3 months of my campaign, I spent with our farmers, our commodity brokers, you know, the people who are buying all of these different things are getting it to the grocery store. And I knew very early on, this is one of the things they talked about. And at that time in October, when they were telling us, oh, you're just gonna have a little problem with, you know, getting your Christmas gifts on time, so shop early. Remember that? I knew this was gonna be, you know, real long, real insidious. I have a number of my family members who still live on that pig farm, very impoverished. The pig farm is no longer operable, but the land, right? And I'm thinking about my family, of the impact this is gonna have, not only on them, but on me and on other people, right? So there is no ceiling to this. And so when you ask me, what are people talking about? People are feeling the squeeze, right? So today is inflation, now Ukraine, but very few people talk about that. If anything, people talk about is why are they trying to get us to go to war, right, over there. But gas prices, inflation, I'm going backwards in time. Critical race theory was huge at one point, right? The mass mandates, a number of people who were losing their jobs because they didn't want to take the vaccine, right? Schools being closed. And so it's like one crisis after another crisis, after another crisis, after another crisis. Once you think you can take a deep breath, oh, boom, we're gonna hit you with something else, right? We're gonna keep you in a constant state of stress, right? It's not healthy. It's not good. You know, I have a consortium of doctors on my team, 2 of whom are psychiatrists. And they talk about you cannot book an appointment with them, primarily because of young people. stress that our nation is under. I feel the pressure. So those are some of the issues, right? Yeah. Yes.
So, regarding, you brought up education, do you, like, when it comes to the topic of education, whether it be K through 12 or higher education, whichever you wanna talk about, what do you see as the current problems, and what specific, policies would you try to implement to resolve those problems?
Yeah. It's a lot of different problems, right? I homeschooled my kids, because I saw 7 years ago, maybe 8 years ago now, what parents are talking about today. Right, when my daughter was in kindergarten at the time, getting ready to go in. My son was in 3rd grade, and some of this foolishness that we see, I saw it then, right? Now everyone else sees it, so great. But I saw it about 8 years ago, and I decided I wanted something different for my children. I think crisis after crises after crises. I mean, obviously education, we are ranking very low, do you know that? In math and science and English, right, grammar, America is ranking very low relative to some of the other nations. We're not as competitive, right, as we would want to be. Some of the sciences, we should be very focused on those, some of the technology, and yet we're not. If you're watching the news, or if I'm listening to my children talk, there's a tremendous emphasis on LGBTQ, and the other alphabet that goes with that, very focused on race, very focused on race, right? Tremendous amount of focus on race. Those seem to be some of the things when you're watching parents who are concerned and want to be involved, become labeled domestic terrorists. Did y'all see that? That should be very concerning for all of us, right? Even if it was our side of the aisle doing it to the other side of the aisle, we should feel very concerned about that, right? I think the Board of Education has, I think their best years are behind them. I think we need to look at how we want to move forward as a nation, or whether or not we have them, whether or not they are effective or have become a stumbling block. Because the metrics that should guide them are not necessarily when you look at our children's test scores. When you look at what they're being taught, the focus of it, and the power of a school board, of a national school board that has the ability to work within an administration to begin to label parents domestic terrorists. Clearly, like most Republicans, I believe that tax dollars should go with the child, and that used to be an issue just for urban areas, right? To get primarily Black kids, poor kids out of bad schools and into better schools. But now you see a number of parents during these last 2 years under COVID and paying attention to what their children are being taught, want to take their kids out of public schools and put them into private schools or just homeschool them. When we homeschool, I still had to pay property taxes, right? And yet I was doing everything. And so those are some of the things that I think we can begin to address. Yes, sir. And then I'll come to you. Economic major, right? Good questions.
So I think we all appreciate your very unique story, and obviously, if you were to go to the Senate, you'd be Kathy Barnette. But which of your colleagues there would you most ideologically align with?
I like Senator Joni Ernst. I think she's really great, amazing lady. I like Josh Hawley. Yeah, and a couple of others in that same ilk. I really like Senator Rand Paul right about now. I don't know, for a variety of reasons. So I think we have some good ones. I think we have some who have a very large platform because they see what's down the road for them, whether it's to run for president. We need very deliberate people in office right now who will pay attention to what's going on. I'm gonna go to the gentleman right back there.
Why do you think you're more fit to serve on the Senate than your opponents?
Good question. Let me answer it this way. You're an economic major, right? Yeah. And when I was in the financial industry, every prospectus I put out, we always had this labeling that said past performance is not indicative of future results, right? And yet, for every single company I ever analyzed, I always started off with their past, right? I would build financial models, and I would start off with, not just 5 years, if I could go back 10 years. I wanted to go back 10 years, and I did that for every single financial statement. Why do you think I did that? If past performance is not indicative of future results, why do you think we always start off with the past?
So you know where they started and where they're going?
It's a really good indicator, right? Of what someone has done in the past is a really good indicator of what they're gonna do in the future for you, right? So when you have someone who has spent their entire public career pretending to be a liberal alongside Oprah Winfrey and Michelle Obama, and now all of a sudden, because it's convenient, say not only a Republican, but a conservative Republican, right? Like that's like extra. Doesn't take much to be a Republican, but to be a conservative Republican, right? So let's look at what they've done in the past, right? And see who are we really talking about. Or when we're talking about someone else who is the largest foreign shareholder of Chinese stocks, right? If you know anything about China, you do not get access to their market unless you have completely sold yourself out to the one China way. They're very protective, right? And so when that particular person comes and says, oh, I'm just Opie from Muskogee with his little faded blue jeans, maybe you need to look at what this person has done in the past to give you, a hedge fund. Are y'all familiar with how that works? You bet against America. You bet against American companies, right? That's how you make millions. And this particular person I'm talking about was not just a little good, he was the best in the world because he was the CEO of the largest hedge fund company in the world, right? So if you wanna know where someone is going, it's not 100%, that's why it's not indicative of future, but get a good look at where they've been. That should give you a really good insight on where these people are going to go. I love my country. I understand what it is we're about to lose. And we need people who are fighters. Look at my history. I have always been a fighter, even before I knew I was fighting anything. But everything that I have gone throughout my young formative years to now has prepared me for what I'm doing. But look at my book, look at my videos, look at the things that I've done and how I've conducted myself. So just on that portion alone. Also, listen to what people are saying and whether or not they have any depth of knowledge of the subject matter, or if they've just learned our talking points and now they're parroting them back to you. Be mindful of that, right? Doesn't take much. You have a number of Democrats who are jumping ship from Democrat Party, jumping over into the Republican Party because they see what we all see, the likelihood of a very strong red wave. And so they're learning our talking points. And then they come with their pizzazz and their jazz, and these are smart people. They are at the top of their industries, so they can memorize our talking points and then parrot it back to you. You are not that young to where you can't remember what we just lived through these past 2 years. We should have learned by now what kind of candidate we want in Senate fighting for us, right? We should have learned that by now. I hesitate to think what more do Democrats have to do to us before we learn our lesson that any old warm body with an R next to their name is not enough. We need people who have actually read the Constitution and have a respect for the Constitution, will uphold the Constitution, and not simply evolve once they get in office and get that power, right? We need fighters like never before. People who understand the issues and who will fight for you and your families. That is what I'm offering. In fact, I believe I'm your best chance at ever getting anyone in office who will actually fight for you, who will actually put a stake in the ground, because we are rushing towards something that is very insidious. How many of you have read about the World Economic Forum? Yeah. How many of you know who Klaus Schwab is? What did you say?
Bill said that piece of shit.
Yes.
We'll have to bleep that.
If you are reading and you know what is about to happen, this thing is really happening. And it is moving, and there seems to be very few people on our side who are aware of this or who are incentivized to stop it, right? Because if you're a part of the political, this isn't really about Republican versus Democrats. I don't know if y'all recognize that or not. This is truly about elites and those who are not. The haves versus the have-nots, those who are in power and coalescing that power around them. Because the two particular people who are running in my race, these carpetbaggers who are parachuted into Pennsylvania because it's convenient, because they would never be able to win as a Republican in their state. So they open up a map and say, oh yeah, I think here, right? Purple state. Republicans are stupid. Go in, dog and pony show, learn some of their talking points, parrot it back to them. They'll never know, right? Pay people to endorse me, and then they're like, oh yeah, that person endorsed them. People get paid to do that, right? They won't know. They haven't learned their lesson. There are influencers within our party who brought these people in, right? And they know them. But it's not about Republican versus Democrat. It's about of our own kind. Let's keep our own kind in, right? They're powerful. They're part of the inner group, the inner workings, right? So be very mindful, as I say to my kids, keep your head on a swivel. Pay attention to what's going on around you. Okay, you, and the gentleman in the back.
I was really moved by your story, and I know like Pennsylvania has always been like a state of the working people, from the miners of Appalachia to Steelers in Pittsburgh to like rail workers in Altoona, and in the past, I guess several decades, those like good paying job for the working class have been very eroded. And we have lost a lot of the job, and the working people are feeling their standard of living are threatened. Yeah. And like corporates, they don't care if outsourcing manufacturing to Thailand, to China, to Vietnam helps with their profit, they'll do it. If automation and laying off people helps profit, they'll do it. So I'm wondering what kind of policy you propose that can help with working people, since I think it's very relevant to this state.
I think it's very relevant to this state. It's a wonderful question. Thank you so very much. So many places to go, but I have some economic and finance students in here, so let's talk economics. Love economics. Where do you want to go? So many places to start. Picture the economy as a bicycle. And on that bicycle, you have two pedals. One, when Republicans get in office, what are the two things we say we're gonna do? Cut taxes and deregulate, right? So one pedal is cutting taxes. The other pedal, deregulating. And we get in office and we just pedal our little hearts out, right? And we move the bike a little bit. But now imagine on that bicycle that the chain on that bicycle is the Federal Reserve. And if the Federal Reserve is broken, how far are you going to move on your bicycle? We've all had bicycles that pop, the chain pop, right? You're not gonna go very far. You're gonna pedal your little hearts out, but you're not gonna go very far. I believe one of the number 1 issues in our country is the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve, economics, corporate finance. The Federal Reserve is perhaps the number 1 reason why we have wealth inequality in this country. Think about just these past 2 years with quantitative easing and what it has done. If you went into this market with significant assets in the stock market, you're actually better off today than you were before the pandemic. If you went into this market like the majority of Americans that you just mentioned, with little to no financial assets, you're worse off today than you were before the pandemic. And remember, I just read you numbers, real numbers, how there is no ceiling to this inflation. There is no ceiling to these gas prices, right? And if we really become entangled in Ukraine and Russia, it's only gonna escalate it. Who do you think that's gonna hurt?
Working people.
It's gonna hurt the working people. Look at stock, if you own oil and stock prices right now, you're doing real well, right? But for the majority of Americans, they're complaining about the higher gas prices, right? Because supply and demand, we're restricting supply, demand stays high, what happens to prices? They continue to go up, right? So, most people don't go there. Most people talk about taxes and deregulation because they're surface politicians, right? I actually understand how the economy works, right? And with the Federal Reserve is perhaps the number one reason. Now, the Federal Reserve flows up, they get their mandates from the Senate, actually, right? It is the Senate job to oversee and to clarify the mandates of the Federal Reserve. And I believe that the mandate should be on stabilizing the US dollar. When you stabilize the US dollar, if you look from 1914 when the Federal Reserve came into place and on, it is so clear that during those times when the Federal Reserve mandate was to stabilize the US dollar after inflation, you saw wage growth grow like 3.57%, right? For the bottom 90%. It's so interesting that when you watch the graphs, you have the bottom 90% and the top 10%, and they moved like this prior to 1972. What happened in 1972?
Nixon took us off the gold standard.
Yes, look at that, right? And then almost immediately, cause see, back then we had World War I, World War II, but we were all there together, bottom 90, top 10, well, here we are like this, right? And when I suffered, they suffered, right? So they were incentivized to do the right things with policies. And then you have 1972 come, and we get off the gold standard, and almost like a hockey stick. It looks exactly like a hockey stick. You see the bottom 90, we have not changed. We're right here, right? But that top 10, boom, it's like a hockey stick, right? It's not rocket science. These people understand what they're doing. I did a television interview on Fox, and they were saying, talk to me about the unintended consequences of inflation. I'm like, I have to pause you right there because I take issue with the phrase unintended consequences. These are extremely smart people. Janet Yellen is probably one of the smartest. Her degree is like right up there. She's brilliant. These are not stupid people. These are not unintended consequences. We know exactly what causes inflation. I have never heard of transitory inflation until last year. Right? All of a sudden, it's transitory. What does that mean? Like, it's not gonna be here forever? I hope not. But why is that a reason to continue to create these asset bubbles? Why is that a reason to continue to do this when you know who you're going to hurt, right? And yet, we have allowed them to do that. That is perhaps the number one thing we can do. You begin to stabilize dollars, that stabilizes a lot of other investments, right? If you're trying to invest in a company and the value of the dollar is here, then here, then here, then here, it makes it much easier if you're able to stabilize, let that be the mandate or the focus of the Federal Reserve, to stabilize the US dollar, because it is very factual. It's numbers, right? That's why I like finance and math, because it's numbers. I understand that, right? There's very little room for wiggling around, right? If you're looking at what's really going on. Now, of course, there are other things we can do, but I think that is perhaps the number one issue that no one ever talks about. We talk about cutting taxes, flat taxes. I'm for a flat tax. I'm for, a number of those deregulating, especially in the energy sector. It's a very hostile environment. No one in their right mind is going to spend billions of dollars to get us out of this hot mess liberals and climate change purveyors have stuck us in. Who in their right mind? I don't care if you have 9 million permits. Who in their right mind would invest billions of their dollars environment that is being just swallowed up by green climate, or, what they call it, Green New Deal, right? Who in their right mind would do that? So it's a very hostile environment because of all of these regulations. Last on that, how many of you have heard of the ESG, environmental, something governance, social governance? That is real. And it has become the new credit score of America. China has that, something like that. And now America has it. This is very real. It is happening. Do you know a lot about that?
No, business courses actually teach you a little bit about it, is it not?
Yeah. Yeah, it is very real. It is really happening. It is becoming the new standard. If you're not sufficiently, I would just say, woke enough, they intend to really put some screws on, tighten those screws up on you. We saw a little bit of that during these past 2 years, with the federal government. Are y'all twins? Are you? Yes? Oh, okay, yeah. It's like my eyes kind of trick on me. I see some differences, some nuances, but kind of look real similar. Okay, sorry. I just had to put that out there, because I keep looking at you like, you look so much alike. Yeah. Next question. Yes, sir.
So obviously economics looks to be your strong suit, but there's like other areas of the Senate field besides economics. How do you plan on reinforcing those areas?
Well, which area are you talking about?
Let's go foreign policy, considering that's also.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that. Look, I'm a little good at everything.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about it, right? So what do we wanna talk about? We wanna talk about China and how they're about to do a Hong Kong on Taiwan. That, we have a national interest to protect Taiwan. They call it the first chain island, is what, that's the strategy, the military strategy. First chain island from Japan all the way down to South China Sea. Are you familiar with that?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, that is a national interest. That we need to make sure, because that is about to happen too. China is going to do a Hong Kong on Taiwan. That's real. So can you imagine if we allow ourselves to be entangled in what's going on in Ukraine and Russia, and now Taiwan do what is in Taiwan's interest to do, or China do what is in their interest to do? Can you imagine our nation engaged in 2 full-scale invasions? Our allies are real thin right now. They see what we see. Biden is incompetent, and he has surrounded himself with inferior talent. They see what we see. They see weakness. Putin today is the exact same Putin of 4 years ago. What changed? Yes. The administration, rhinos feeling emboldened again, right? I'm gonna start calling them ANOs, Americans in name only. I think that's more fitting for them. But I'm gonna see if that can go viral is where I go. But that's a real issue, right? Because Taiwan, over 80%, maybe 90% of our semiconductors come from there. You have a phone, you have brakes in your cars, the sensors, everything, we use that in washing machines, everything. Can you imagine if China gets that? And they don't wanna stop there, they wanna continue with that westward expansion right into the Pacific Ocean. These people China does not want to be the sole unopposed superpower just over Asia. They want to be the sole unopposed superpower of the world. There's a shift going on in global dominance. It is happening right before our eyes. No one's talking about it, right? So that's very real. But let's look at Ukraine. My heart goes out to the Ukrainian people. My heart goes out to the citizens of Russia. They have no control over a regime that has gone rogue, right? I don't blame them for what Putin is doing. Putin is doing what is in his DNA to do. He's a tyrant, right? That's what tyrants do. Tyrants, Iran, China, North Korea, Russia, they only respond to one thing: decisive strength. All this rhetoric and beating of chest, they don't listen to that, right? But as your senator, I would never send you, because it wouldn't be my generation that I would be sending into war. It would be your generation. I would never vote to send you into a war that we have no clear American national interest. That's important for you, not my generation, right? I did my time. But for you, I would never vote for that to line someone else's pocket or to go along to get along. That's very important, because there are those who are running with me who are saying, oh, we need to do a no-fly zone. Do you know what that means, a no-fly zone? That means that Putin flies in, we are prepared as a country to engage with the nuclear power. That's huge. They're like, oh, do a no-fly zone. Oh, send our weapons in. Oh, send our money in. Oh, send. We are engaging ourselves into something where there is no real clear national interest for us to engage at that level when we recognize what is about to happen over here in Taiwan. We need to be very deliberate. We need to be very sober in our thinking right now, and not just flying by the seat of our pants. Lindsey Graham was saying, not like last week, someone needs to assassinate Putin. Dude, what are you talking about? You don't just say that out there like that, right? Now this same person is calling for a no-fly zone. This is ratchet. But before we should do that, even if you think we should do that, if some of you believe we should do that, perhaps we should first demand that Germany no longer gets 50% of their energy source from Putin. Did y'all know that? Italy gets 46% of their energy source from Putin. Did y'all know that? The Balkan states, Moldova gets 100% of their energy source from Putin. So while the European countries and NATO are providing resources to Ukraine, putting up praying hand emojis and flags, I stand with Ukraine, that's kind of the equivalent of watching a dog chase its own tail. Have y'all seen that before? It's like high energy, high drama, but really not going anywhere. How are you going to provide resources to Ukraine while at the same time provide resources to Putin to continue doing what it is that he's doing to the Ukrainian people? You see how insidious that is? And yet we have children in positions of leadership who are calling for a no-fly zone, assassinate Putin, as if there's not a whole nother arm over here that is allowing Putin to be Putin. What about making America energy independent again? What about opening up more lines? Instead, Biden is doing a study to close down another line, line 5, in America, as if supply is not already low, and we're already struggling. Do you see how insidious this is? This is beginning to seem real intentional, real evil, because these are not stupid people. I don't buy that. And yet it's happening. And who's really talking about it? And this is your future. I don't know how much time I have. I mean, I could go on forever.
We have about 10 more minutes.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Can you briefly discuss your stance on protecting Pennsylvania's Second Amendment rights?
Yes, briefly. I practiced my Second Amendment on a daily basis before I decided to